We'll wait just another minute or two to let the later arrivals straggle in. Okay, Dan, are we ready? Welcome everybody to the Northwood University Freedom Seminar Lecture and Film Series for 2024. My name is Dale Matchek. I'm the chair of the Econ program here at Northwood University. And the Freedom Seminar is our way of making our values and our core beliefs practical and to educate both our students and the general public about issues of the day from a perspective of liberty. And so I'm glad that you decided to join us. I hope you will join us again at future events. Next event, 2 weeks from today, is a film about a political activist in Hong Kong and one of the world's wealthiest entrepreneurs, Jimmy Lai, who forsook a relatively comfortable and wealthy position in order to fight for democracy and freedom in Hong Kong. And his story is told in the film The Hong Konger, which we will be screening next week. The producer of that film will be, 2 weeks from tonight. Producer of that film, Eric Krohn, will be with us. And so I hope you'll join us for that. Now, for tonight's event, we have a topic of vital interest, especially to young people, but it should be something of interest to all Americans. It's a matter of some urgency, I think, as an economist, maybe not from a political perspective, but certainly from an economic perspective. The longer we wait to tackle our problems with our vast implied debt from the promises we've made under Social Security and Medicaid, the sooner we act and the more effectively we act, the more easily we can solve the problem. The more we delay, the more difficult and the less attractive our options become. So I know that the guest we have tonight understands this very well. His name is Eric Nagar. He is one of the authors of this book, Plan for America. I hope all of you chose to pick up a copy on your way in. It's a very short book, a brief outline of what is a fairly innovative and I think a feasible plan for dealing with these problems responsibly and fairly. And he's going to talk about this. First, let me talk about him. So Eric Nagar is a professional investment advisor and chartered retirement plan specialist. He earned his MBA from the University of South Alabama and his master's in history from Harvard University. He served for 30 years in the United States Army Reserve and achieved the rank of lieutenant colonel there. And today he divides his time between his professional duties and his citizenship and his activism here on behalf of the Plan for America. So I'm pleased to welcome virtually Mr. Eric Nagar. Thank you, Eric, for being with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Providing universal health care and $50 trillion. All three challenges we face is access to affordable health care. Insurance prices have skyrocketed almost as fast as our national debt. Another challenge so great, Congress doesn't even bother offering any solutions. Even as the deficit gets bigger every year, they make even more promises to spend money in the future that we won't have. These unfunded liabilities add up to over $150 trillion and may be our greatest challenge yet. All three of these challenges can be overcome, but the time for kicking the can down the road is over. People across America are looking for a way out, and it's time to let them opt for a different plan. Our plan for America takes on all three of these great challenges, providing universal health care, ending the national debt, and funding those promises they made about your Social Security and Medicare. It may sound too good to be true, but it can be done.
I'm here to tell you that it is possible. It is possible.
Since 2010, the payroll tax hasn't been enough to cover benefit payments for the massive baby boomer generation that started to retire. Social Security will have to start to draw down from the trust fund itself to help pay for benefits. And even that fund won't last forever. Experts predict the reserves could run out by 2035, at which point Social Security would only be able to pay about 79% of promised benefits. And the Bipartisan Policy Center, a DC think tank, says the reserves could be depleted by 2028.
Your retirement will never be secure as long as politicians can raid our Social Security and Medicare contributions to spend your money on their unrelated pet projects. Our plan for America protects your retirement by creating an independent trust, nicknamed FAST, with your own individual account. Once people are allowed to have their payroll taxes flow into an account in their name, a contract among the federal government, the 50 states, and you will protect your FAST account. And your guaranteed FAST benefits will never be less than what the present Social Security model promises. In the current system, those benefits just go away when you die. But with Plan for America, these payments pass on to your heirs from generation to generation. By investing your money in a broad index of American companies, instead of the government just using it up, the returns will grow year after year, allowing us to shift from a system built on debt to one based on sustainable growth. This plan benefits us all. Imagine an America where everyone not only has their own retirement plan, but their own healthcare plan too. And people who make less than $40,000 per year have no out-of-pocket healthcare costs. Plan for America enables people to afford health insurance that covers pre-existing conditions and nursing home care without putting a cap on benefits. This is possible if we give people the option to choose the FAST accounts instead of forcing them to pay payroll taxes that add up to $153 out of every $1,000 they earn. Although the government wants this revenue they get from the payroll taxes, they come with unfunded liabilities that will devastate their budgets in the coming years. Their books are way better off without them. The trust will pay out benefits with 2% of the total contributions each year. This cash flow will grow over time and soon pay for itself. Until then, FAST will issue bonds backed by the federal government to cover these initial costs. These bonds will be paid off by the trust and not the government. And the more that's invested in America with FAST, the faster those bonds will no longer be needed. U.S. stock markets have yielded about a 10% compounded annual return over the past century, even when you include the Great Depression. Our model shows this plan works even if stocks return 40% less than that. Let's quit delaying the inevitable and do something. The time to act is now, and our plan for America.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Mekchek, for that introduction. Hope you all liked that video there. There's one thing, again, we hope you take from it. It's that there is hope, that there's possibilities. The survey I heard today says that a plurality of Americans don't feel that the American dream is attainable or reachable anymore. And we think that it is. So if there's one thing you come away with, it's hopefully a hopeful message. And, this this plan, whether it's this plan or whether this plan spurs thought to solve the problem, that's what we're trying to accomplish here. I hope you all got a copy of the book. If you hold it up, if you do, I could see the audience there, so hold up your book, and hope you enjoy that. And it's a pleasure for me to be with you here virtually at Northwood. You know, in February in Michigan, I'm glad it's virtual because I live in the sunny South. But anyway, let's get started. The video was a great overview, but let's talk about how we got here. You know, once upon a time, for Social Security, there was supposed to be what's called a lockbox, meaning that the money you contributed to Social Security would be kept for you by the government in a trust fund and not spent on anything else. That was the idea. By the way, by a show of hands in the audience there, how many of you do not think that you will ever see any money from Social Security when you are of retirement age? How many of you do not think you will see any? Okay, that's all right. That looks like the majority of you, which is really what I would expect from you know, the younger generation. And let me also just emphasize that the U.S. government is not contractually bound to give you your Social Security. It's a promise, but it's not in writing and it's not guaranteed. And the rules have been changed many times over the years. From when Social Security was started in the 1930s, the amount of taxes to sustain it has been raised. The retirement age has been raised. Taxability of benefits has been changed. So there are changes that have been made, and there are more changes that could be made just by our politicians. So the Social Security is not a guarantee. So anyway, we had a lockbox, and politicians of both parties, I'm not trying to blame one or the other here, but both parties broke open the lockbox and have spent all the money on other things. In fact, the only thing that's in the Social Security Trust Fund today is non-negotiable government IOUs, which means the government has to borrow money in order to redeem those IOUs. So you could really say the system is bankrupt today. Not that it will be solvent until the 2030s or in 2028, as one source on the video cited, but there's really no money in there today. So this is an urgent problem that needs to be addressed. And the solutions that we've heard, the other solutions that we've heard, merely tweak the system right now, whether it's talking about means testing, which means you only give benefits to people who really need them and not to those who contributed their whole lives and maybe don't need them, or raising the retirement age even further. Right now, for those who are born after 1960, the retirement age is 67 years of age, and but these are merely band-aids that won't fundamentally solve the problem. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, one too far. There we go. Now, when we talk about debt, there's really only 4 ways to handle it, and the debt is massive. It's 30 trillion that the government is in debt right now and counting, and with you know, $1 to $2 trillion deficits every year. And then there's 150 trillion of unfunded liabilities, which means that the obligations that we owe to retirees are greater than the money we have coming in. And in fact, I believe it was 2020 was a tipping point where the benefits going out exceeded the taxable income coming in, or the taxes coming in. So we're already spending more than we're taking in. It's just getting worse because of the demographics of our country. So there are 4 ways in which debt can be handled. One is to roll it over, which means just keep deferring it, borrowing more and delaying the day of reckoning. A second option is to inflate it away, meaning print more money. printing more money is very inflationary and makes your dollars worth less every time that is done, so that's not an ideal thing. A third option is to repudiate it altogether, repudiate the debt, say, I'm not going to pay it. A few governments have tried that in the world. Argentina comes to mind, not with a pleasant result, so that's not something good either. And the fourth option, of course, is to pay it off. Our government right now is not even really remotely thinking about that as an option. They're really working on numbers 1 and 2, neither of which end well. So, you know, solving this problem is going to have to happen, and we have major party candidates, the two leading candidates of the two major political parties have said no changes to the entitlements, which is really, in our view, not a responsible position because of our debt situation. Next slide, please. Now, here's a chart. This is pre-COVID, actually, a chart of federal spending and what the slices of the pie there. And you'll see that 62% is the mandatory entitlement programs, and another 8% is interest on the debt. That's before interest rates started rising. So even pre-COVID, we had 70% of our budget and growing going to these entitlement programs or interest on the debt. And the part that's getting squeezed is the discretionary, which is our military, which is under pressure right now with a lot of conflicts going on around the world. So this becomes a national security issue if we cannot adequately fund our military or do other basic functions of government because the budget's being squeezed by the entitlement programs. Next slide, please. All right, so how did this plan come about? First of all, let me just give you some background on the idea maker himself, Terry Nagar. That's my brother, Terry. He's a certified financial planner. That's what CFP stands for. He's been one for over 40 years, helping people manage money, invest their money wisely, and prepare for retirement and enjoy their retirement. So he's been doing this for a long time. CLU stands for Chartered Life Underwriter, so he knows about insurance, life insurance, or as we say in the South, insurance. Got to accent the first syllable. And the CHFC stands for Chartered Financial Consultant. So it's a lot of alphabet soup after his name. It just basically means he's a smart guy and knows about money and financial planning for individuals. And one thing he likes to do on the weekends is take walks on the beach and reflect now that he's an empty nester, and he was concerned about his children and future grandchildren. In fact, he just became a grandfather very recently, and he's hopeful that the future for his children and grandchildren will be as good as it was for him in this country. And he thought about, what if we could devise a reasonably comprehensive financial plan for every U.S. citizen? And reasonably comprehensive consists of 5 elements, which are listed here: retirement, investments, taxation, insurance, and estate planning. If every American had access to these basic things, everyone would be taken care of. And in our investment advisory practice, we do that for our clients, but not everyone can afford or necessarily comes into contact with an investment advisor or an investment professional. So what if this could be done for every U.S. citizen? That was his dream, and we've been working on this for quite a while. The book is one of the fruits of our labor here. Next, please. All right, I also want to give our nonpartisan credentials here. This idea, we think, would have appeal to both parties. You see on the cover of the book, we have an elephant and a donkey, a Democrat and Republican embracing each other. If a plan is perceived as being partisan from one side or the other, half the country might be liable to hate it without even listening to it. So what we tried to devise is something that would have great appeal. So if we read from left to right, so I'll start with our liberal friends on the left. What are some things they're interested in any type of reform that our plan attempts to address? Well, number one, they like the democratization of wealth, a more equitable distribution of wealth, and closing the income pay gap between the super wealthy and the poor. Our plan does this because it would make every citizen an owner of corporate America. The so-called Wall Street fat cats would be working for the common ordinary citizen, would be owned by the common ordinary citizen. So that's one thing that we think would have great appeal for a true liberal. Secondly, we have some conditions in here for better corporate governance, which I'll get to later, but there is, if U.S. citizens are owners of corporate America, they are able to vote proxies and things that decide corporate compensation that would mitigate against excessive corporate compensation. Another thing that has long been a goal, I think, a dream of the left, is to have a universal health care. As we know, the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, does not cover about 20 million Americans. So there's at least 20 million Americans without coverage right now. And this way, there would be truly universal coverage with no out-of-pocket costs for low-income Americans. And so this plan does that as well. It's technically a single-payer system, which is, you know, Bernie Sanders and some have really, I think, advocated for a long time. And this plan is really a public-private partnership. It's not just privatization. It's not that. There is a role for the U.S. government to play, and there is a government guarantee tied into all of this. So we think that all of those factors would appeal to a true liberal. Next slide. Let's talk about our conservative friends and our libertarian friends. What would be some of the things that appeal to them? Next, please. Next slide, please. We'll have it here in a moment.
Eric, we can see the slide here.
Oh, you can? Okay. I'm not seeing it for some reason. But all right, the next slide is for our conservative, our libertarian friends, our friends on the right. They're historically concerned with elimination of debts, and this would involve that, and also include eliminating the $150 trillion in unfunded liabilities over time. It would not happen overnight, and I'm not promising that it would. Our estimate will be somewhere, 30 to 50 years after this plan is there. I see it now. 30 to 50 years after this plan is enacted, but at least that's better than the current path that we're on right now. Second thing is tax reduction for individuals and businesses. Eventually eliminate it altogether, but lower taxes is a long been a staple of those on the right. They're our conservative friends. Our libertarian friends will like that this plan is voluntary and not compulsory. You can opt in, and if you don't want to opt in, you can stay in the current system. Now, we've designed this such that the goodies are so much better. Why wouldn't you opt in? But nevertheless, it is not compulsory. The size of government diminishes because retirement and health care will be moved off their plate and put into a true lockbox. So the size of government diminishes. Our conservative friends are like that, and participants keep their wealth that they've earned, and no one pays for anyone else's health care. Everyone would have an individual account, and that way it will be eventually completely self-funded. So those are some of the things that a true conservative would like, and so we think that this plan has appeal across party lines. Next slide, please. We propose enacting this plan through a contract, which is harder to change than just legislation. If it was only legislation and it was passed by a president and a Congress in one administration or one 4-year cycle, and another election came and different people were voted in, then the plan could be altered. But if a contract was signed on top of the enabling legislation, then we feel it would be more permanent and harder to change. And ideally, maybe even a constitutional amendment, but those are hard to enact. But anyway, here's what the basic components of the contract would be. First of all, the parties would be the federal government, the state governments collectively, and this trust that the video referred to called the For America Security Trust. Think of it as kind of like a trust similar to a 401k plan. Now, for a contract to be effective, there have to be goodies for all the parties. Every party has to gain with this. And what do the people gain? Well, the people who would participate, those who would opt into the system, gain tax-favored retirement benefits, which they do not have today, universal, affordable, high-quality health care, which everyone also does not have today, and a legacy for your heirs. Those are great things for the people. For the federal government, they might be getting the best deal of all out of this because they get relief from the $150 trillion of unfunded liabilities, and it'll be much easier to balance budgets going forward and spend things that governments need to spend things on, like defense, for example. And they get a great deal because there's a pathway out of this debt spiral. And state governments also benefit. Now, most state governments have constitutional requirements to have balanced budgets, but nevertheless, Medicare weighs heavily on these budgets, and so do public pensions in some states like Illinois and California. They could get relief from this by maybe having the public pensions be part of this plan and get their retired public workers paid out that way in a more secure way. So every party would stand to gain from these aspects of the contract. Next slide, please. All right, there are 4 provisions of the contract that I will hire here. Obviously, in order to get something, you have to give something too, and the federal government would have to give up some things. One thing it would give up is that for those people who are participating in the plan, the payroll taxes that you're right now, you're contributing, if you're working, 7.65%, your employer's matching that, combined that's 15.3% is going to the government right now to fund the entitlements. Under our plan, if you opt in, the 15.3 goes to a personal account in your name. And all the contributions are tax deductible going in and would be tax-free coming out. That's part of the terms of the contract. The government would be giving up the tax revenue for that in exchange for being relieved of all these unfunded liabilities. Furthermore, the government would agree to make dividends tax deductible to corporations and tax-free to recipients. What we're trying to do is create a culture of equity or ownership and shift away from a culture of debt like we have. There's a lot of individual debt in this country too. Some of you may know who Dave Ramsey is. I'm a Dave Ramsey smart investor, among other things. His book, Total Money Makeover, talks about shifting individually from a culture of debt to equity. We're trying to do this on a national scale. A third component of the contract, government would guarantee the private trust, the fast debt, and pay the interest on those bonds. So what would happen is the promises must be kept to the current retirees, and in order to pay them out, the private trust would be able to issue bonds, and those bonds would be guaranteed by the U.S. government and the interest on them paid by the U.S. government. And then finally, what really makes our plan unique, what we believe, is the funding mechanism that ultimately retires all the debt, and that is a 2% fee that the trust takes every year of the assets that are in the trust. So, for example, right now there's approximately $1 trillion every year generated by the payroll taxes. If this were in the trust, if this were all going into the trust, 2% of that in year one would be about $20 billion. So $20 billion, in the first year. The second year, there'd be another $20 billion, plus whatever market growth there was. So over time, this is a greatly increasing cash flow. We're trying to harness what Albert Einstein called the eighth wonder of the world, the power of compounding interest. At first, it'll be very small, but it will grow over time. So this funding mechanism is what will ultimately pay down the debt. Next slide, please. All right, we're going to talk about retirement first. There's the retirement side of this and the healthcare side of this. And no, maybe there's a delay. I'm not seeing the slide on the screen there.
You do see it.
Okay, all right, I'll keep going then. All right, so as I alluded to in the previous slide, the payroll tax, the 15.3, if you opt in, goes into a personal account in your name. We don't want there to be investment choices here because that could be overwhelming, and we don't want the trustees of the trust to be picking winners and losers. So we feel that the best way to go about this is to create an all-market index of publicly traded U.S. companies. And your investments will just go automatically into that, making you an owner of corporate America. Now, it would be virtually cost-free to administer an index like this. You could bid this out to one of the big fund companies like Vanguard or BlackRock, who already have many index funds like this, the total market index, and they might charge maybe a basis point or two to do this. So a basis point is 1/100th of 1%. So 100 basis points are 1%. So 1 basis point would be almost costless, and we think they could administer an index like this, which would be very large in size for very small cost. So it would cost the trust almost nothing, and it would be something where there'd be no investment choice. You just the money goes in there, and it would incentivize companies to be listed on this index because they would want access to this capital. It would incent U.S. corporations to, if they were headquartered elsewhere, to relocate back to the United States. It would incentivize companies that are private to list and go public. So we think there'd be a big boom in initial public offerings, and the investment banks would like it as well. So we think that would create a lot of positive economic activity. So that's the first part of the retirement. Next slide, please. All right, and at retirement, you would have the highest of 3 payouts. The first level, probably the lowest level, would be what Social Security would have been for you. So you're guaranteed to at least get that. Nothing worse than Social Security. We're actually enhancing Social Security and putting it on a firmer foundation. The second level of guarantee would be 4% compounded annual rate of return. And the third and the most likely would be 4% of actual market returns through time. You know, the market, as alluded in the film, has averaged about 10% a year over the last century. Our model, because it's built in conformity with Congressional Budget Office assumptions, only assumes 6.2%, which is about 40% below historic norms, but it still works. So we think that that assumption is very conservative. So in other words, when you retire, you have a balance in your account. And at retirement, you trigger the cash flow, which is 4%. The first year is 4% of the balance of your account. So, for example, if you had $1 million, you get $40,000 in the first year, tax-free. Now, the nice thing about this plan is that the benefits go on in perpetuity. Under Social Security, when you die and your spouse dies, Social Security benefits end. Once this cash flow is triggered, it goes on forever to your heirs and their heirs beyond that. So that's another thing that makes it better than Social Security. And the principal remains in the trust. So when you retire, you're triggering this cash flow in perpetuity, but the principal stays in the trust so that the trust can keep getting that 2% every year to continue to pay down the debt. Next slide, please. This slide, it might be a little small for you to see, but the light blue line is the market, what basically large company stocks from 1926 through 2021, and the average there is right at about 10.5% average annual return. So the market has done this, and through terrible markets and great markets. I mean, this includes the Great Depression, it includes World War, the 1974 or 72, whatever, Arab oil embargo. It includes the dot-com bubble burst, the Great Recession, and even COVID-19. All those events triggered bear markets, and still the market has persevered over time. Next slide. All right, we're going to show an actual illustration, and that is, why would a 25-year-old person like this plan? You in the audience aren't too far away from that. Why would a 50-year-old and why would a 75-year-old want to opt in? But we're going to start with the 25-year-old. We're going to take the example of a single mom who never earns more than $25,000 a year in her career and works for 40 years, from ages 25 to 65. Now, by our estimates, her Social Security benefit at age 65 would be $14,676 a year. Next slide. However, if she was in the For America Security Trust, in the FAST, and let's just say the market only grew at 6.2% a year, which is way below historic norms, she would have a balance of $381,837 at age 65. And 4% of that, in other words, her minimum payout would be $15,273 a year, tax-free and in perpetuity. So it would be a little better than Social Security. It would go on to her heirs. And if the account grows, which it probably would, because if she's taking 4% and it's growing at 6.2, then she's going to be able to give herself raises. She'll get more than $15,000 over time as the account grows. So the 15 is just the starting place, the minimum below which it cannot drop, but there's a lot of upside there to get more. Is that slide showing? I just want to see. The next slide has more bullet points. There we go. Okay, so there's the illustration. Her FAST balance would be $381,000 at retirement, and her beginning annual payout would be $15,273, better than Social Security. But now let's look at it. What if she had an account where the market grew at historic norms? It grew at 10% a year. How big would her FAST balance be then? Let's look at the next slide, please. So obviously her Social Security would still be the same, but her FAST balance, if the market averaged 10.2% a year for 40 years, her retirement balance would be $1.1 million. And her first year payout would be $45,362, which is, triple what Social Security is. Tax-free and in perpetuity. So, and that, again, that would be the starting point. As the account grew, she would stand to get more. So this is why we think a 25-year-old might be very excited to opt in. And we'll cover the other age groups later as we go. Now, next slide, please. I want to anticipate one of your questions. What if the market has some bad years? And it certainly has. The market, while it's averaged 10%, it hasn't been a straight line. There have been some ups and downs and some big downs. So what happens then? And it's interesting, when we first were designing this plan, we ran a hypothetical and saying, well, what if this plan had been invented in 1928, right before the Great Depression? And we ran our model through actual market returns of those years, of the 30s, of those Great Depression years. So what happens? All right. In retirement, you're still guaranteed to get the 4% of the balance at retirement, okay? At retirement. Can't dip below that. But if the account value drops, an automatic interest-free loan kicks in against the account. In other words, that will be part of the bonds that are issued by the trust. All right, you get an automatic interest-free loan to supplement your account to keep it up to where it can be to give you the payout you need. The loan also kicks in to ensure that an account never drops below 60%, because there's a phenomenon there called drawdown, whereby if an account, any type of investment account, suffers too severe a decline, it could contract to the point where it cannot recover, particularly if you are drawing every year from that account. So what we're trying to avoid is anything below 60% of the account, because if you're drawing 4% and the trust is taking 2%, 6% of 60% is 10%, and that's too heavy. That's not a sustainable draw. We want the draw to be less and sustainable so that the account can grow. So loans automatically kick in to supplement your balance, and then in up years, the loans are repaid. In other words, you don't get, necessarily the raise of your 4% until the account actually grows to sustain it. So in our model, what we looked at through the Great Depression, there were some loans certainly that were triggered in the 1930s. By the 1940s, the accounts had recovered, and there were no more loans ever necessary after that when we got into the the late 40s and the 50s and some really good market years there. And so we suspect there'd be a similar thing here, because, well, first of all, the $1 trillion going into the markets every year will also mitigate some of those down cycles, because investors will be buying every paycheck. More money will be going in, and people will be buying. And we think that'll help the markets as well. All right, next slide. What about current retirees? Okay, the promises have to be kept to them. There are many people who are already retired and collecting Social Security who might want to opt into this system for the health care benefit. So let's see how they will be taken care of. The promises have to be kept to them. They will get their current level of Social Security. The For America Security Trust will issue those bonds. The 2% cash flow will ultimately pay for the current retirees their level of Social Security benefit. I mean, the bonds will do it for now, and then ultimately, when the 2% grows large enough, it can do it. The U.S. government, as I said earlier, will guarantee the bonds that the trust issues and pay interest on those bonds. So we think, arguably, the paper issued by the trust could even be better because of the funding mechanism of the 2%. Right now, the U.S. government doesn't really have a funding mechanism when it's 30-something trillion in debt and trillion-dollar deficits as far as the eye could see. The only way it can raise money is taxation or printing more money. So that's just to cover current obligations. Next slide. So when will the lines cross? You're one slide too far there. There's a little graph. I may have, I hope I didn't move it from the slide deck. Okay. All right, I'll refer to your book then. Page 140 of your book, there's a graph, and there are two lines there, and we'll come to that when we get to it. The top line, the starting top line, is the cash flow that is needed to fund the retirees, and the lower line is the amount of is a 2% cash flow as it grows, and the difference between the two is how much the trust would have to borrow. So as you can see, the trust might have to cumulatively borrow somewhere between $50–100 trillion. That's a lot of money. It's certainly not as big as the unfunded liabilities, but you can see here at the 6.2% market return level, the lines cross here in the late 2070s, or a little over 50 years from now. At that point, when the lines cross, all unfunded liabilities are gone. There are no more unfunded liabilities for the government, and we'll have a completely self-funding system then. Everyone will have his or her own account that will pay each individual in retirement from its own growth and from its own proceeds, and the government will be out from under that debt completely. And then, at that point, goes to fund federal and state government replace taxation of any sort. There won't necessarily need to be income tax, capital gains tax, so-called death tax, estate tax, anything like that will be all gone because this 2% will go to fund government. All right, I want to make sure I have enough time to get to healthcare. That's the slide we're on right now. How will the healthcare work? All right, every individual who opts in will get a guaranteed issue, uni-age, unisex policy, good in any state, across state lines, no pre-existing conditions. Kids can stay on their parents' plan until age 26, just like the Affordable Care Act. Initially, there's $1 million cap on benefits. You can buy more coverage if you want to, but this will cover the vast majority of Americans, sort of those who need catastrophic care. And there are some of those, but the $1 million cap is there initially. And you can spend this money on however you want it, which includes nursing homes. Today, Medicare does not cover nursing home care. But with this money, it's your money. You can use it however you wish, whether that's traditional medicine, acupuncture, chiropractic, whatever. And we think the availability for all types of care will mitigate somewhat against healthcare inflation. Next slide, please. Now, we said earlier that no out-of-pocket costs for those who can't afford it. So we have a sliding scale here. By the way, the premium for each citizen is, not each family, each citizen is $11,200 a year. That was based on a per capita expenditure of healthcare dollars, just dividing it by our population that's of 26 or older. $11,200 a year, that includes a $1,200 health savings account. The health savings account is guaranteed to cover all deductibles and co-pays, and any unspent portion of the HSA is returned at the end of the year tax-free. So the rest of the other $10,000 is the rest of the premium. Now, based on this table, for a single person filing a single tax return earning less than $40,000, or a married couple filing jointly earning less than $80,000, those individuals will be entitled to an interest-free loan against their retirement account to pay their premium, their health care premium. So again, no out-of-pocket cost for those who could not afford it. And there's a sliding scale there. You're eligible for 75% of the premium if you're a married couple earning less than 100, 50% subsidy if you earn less than 120, or 25% subsidy if you're earning under 140. All the loans phase out after that income level. Next slide, please. So what happens is, whenever you get a loan of any kind, it triggers a life insurance policy. So if for some reason you died and there was still a loan outstanding on your retirement account, the life insurance would grow to the size of the loan and go into your retirement account to make the retirement account whole. And I'm going to illustrate that with the story about, what about the guy who never works a day in his life? Okay, how is he going to be covered for health care? Well, if he opts into the system, he'll still have a retirement account, even though there's no money in it, but he will have a retirement account. And let's just say this individual lives from age 26 to 86. He lives for 60 years. He has a health care premium, I'm just rounding it down here, $11,000 a year times 60 years is $660,000. That's at the time of his death. That's how big the loan is that he's taken out against his non-existent retirement account. The life insurance kicks in again, like I said, with the loan equal to the size of the loan. So at his death, $660,000 is paid into his retirement account. Now, his heirs cannot access that until the loan is paid off. So what would be triggered? The 4% that his heirs would normally stand to get go to repaying the loan. Only after the loan is paid off do the heirs then get to receive benefits from this account, which might be, it'll be the max 25 years down the road, because 4 times 25 is 100% of the loan. But it'll probably be quicker than that. But at any rate, there is a mechanism in place so that someone who is not working is not, burden on the taxpayer, on society. He or she will have his own account, and the trust will eventually be made whole with the life insurance. Next slide, please. Let's talk about, we may have some people tuning in, not of college age, so why would a 50-year-old want to opt in? We know why a 25-year-old would be. It's a great deal. You could possibly have, with good market returns, $1 million by the time you're ready to retire. 50-year-old has been in the system for a while, so not as much time to save as much money. Why would he or she want to participate? Well, number one, there'd be no out-of-pocket health care costs. If you earn less than $40,000 a year, you'd still be able to have an interest-free loan against your retirement account that would go into your account at the time of your death if you still owed a loan. The retirement, you're still going to get what Social Security would have been for you, and you can supplement a little bit because if you're still in your working years at age 50, you could still earn a little bit. Let's say you put aside $7,500 a year for 15 years, even at 6.2%. That's $177,000 into your retirement account, and 4% of that would be triggered at retirement. That would pass on to your heirs. The Social Security that you would receive would not pass on to your heirs because that's part of the old legacy. But any new money, anything that went into your retirement account from any loans you had, plus anything you're able to save in your working years, would be able to go on in perpetuity tax-free to your heirs. So that's the legacy. So we think that's why a 50-year-old would want to opt in. Next slide, please. Why would someone past retirement want to opt in? Why would a 75-year-old want to opt in? And we'll talk about that. Again, there's no out-of-pocket healthcare costs. If you you could have a healthcare policy that covered nursing home care, and you could have an interest-free loan against your retirement account, which again, the life insurance would cover and go into your account at your death. You could use it, however you want. Like I say, for nursing home care, you'd have a guaranteed Social Security benefit in retirement. Unlike today, there's not a guarantee. You get your Social Security level of payments for the rest of your life. And assuming you had a loan for the health care, the life insurance would pay into your account at your decease, and the heirs, you'd have at least a small legacy to your heirs after the loan was repaid. So we think that's why a 75-year-old may want to opt in. Next slide, please. And that's the graph I was showing earlier. So I'll just touch on this again for those of you who didn't have the book. This is the green line represents the amount of cash that would be needed, and the blue line represents the 2% funding mechanism from the trust. So at first, the funding mechanism is very low, and the gap between the two is how much the trust would have to borrow during the transition period to the new system. And you can see that it's, $50, $100 trillion would be necessary. That's in billions, by the way, the scale. $50 to $100 trillion would have to be borrowed cumulatively over time, but you can see when the lines cross, all unfunded liabilities are gone, and there is no light at the end of the tunnel like that in today's system, as we all know, unfortunately. All right, next slide, please. Let's talk about debt. Why is the For America Security Trust or the FAST debt better than U.S. government debt? Well, the thing about the FAST bonds, they can only be used to pay current retirees or loan to current participants. So this would be reenacting the lockbox. In this trust, the government could not come in and raid this trust and spend it on other things and bankrupt the system as they did with the Social Security Trust Fund. This money would be off limits to the government and could only be used for these purposes. The 2% funding mechanism will eventually retire the debt, and today, like I say, the U.S. government either just prints or borrows money. The U.S. government doesn't really have a funding mechanism like this today, unfortunately, because we are deficit spending. And the U.S. government is still guaranteeing the bonds and paying interest on them. So it's a, you know, government bonds are very high quality today because of the government guarantee. Those in the trust will have the government guarantee and the 2% funding mechanism to retire them. So that's why we think that debt would be slightly better. Next slide. There are other ramifications here that I don't really have the time to dive into great detail, but I will touch upon them. Everyone who opts in is going to be an owner in corporate America, so that means you get to vote the proxies of the companies you own. Some of the biggest companies in America would be on this index. So the annual proxy vote would be good for corporate governance. One of the duties of the trustees of the trust would be to appoint many boards to evaluate how each company on the index is performing relative to its peers and make recommendations to vote for or against the directors based on their performance. And good corporate governance, good, you know, being in good legal standing, not excessive compensation for the senior executives, all these things will be looked at, and the U.S. citizens will have an opportunity to vote on. The U.S. will shift from a culture of debt to one of equity or ownership. And once the debts are retired, here's the formula. Once the unfunded liabilities are gone, somewhere from the 2050s to the 2070s, the 2% funding mechanism goes half to the states and half to the U.S. government to fund those governments, replacing taxation as a source of revenue of any type. So that's the golden era somewhere down the road. Next slide, please. This is what happens if we do nothing. This graph is also on page 141 of your book. These are entitlement deficits starting in 2020, and you can see they skyrocket as far as the eye can see, and at some point they become unsustainable. At some point we can no longer keep the promises that were made, and it's not going to end well. You know, how it will end is not really predictable, but there's no other country to bail us out. If the United States economy goes down, the world economy goes down, and it will not be pleasant for anyone. So this has to be addressed, and sooner is better than later. Next slide, please. So what can we do to help? Let's talk about that. You know, you have a role to play here. First of all, you could like us on Facebook. That has we have about 50,000 followers today, and you'll get regular you know, updates from us on our progress with the plan. You can introduce us to thought leaders. We're always trying to get some more traction on this. You could certainly contribute to us. Plan for America is a 501c3. It's a nonprofit, and all donations are tax deductible. You can share our book and our podcast links, and which is on our website, planforamerica.us. You can write and call your elected officials and ask them to tell you about the plan. Hey, what about Plan for America? What do you think about that? Many of them won't necessarily know what you're talking about, but you can raise awareness and make them want to learn, make them want to find out. And next slide, we have a pretty unique opportunity here in a presidential election year, because in our view, Plan for America is a ready-made platform for a candidate to run on. When you have former President Trump and current President Biden saying no changes to entitlements, how is that going to solve the problem? It's not. And so calling Dean Phillips, calling Nikki Haley, calling Robert Kennedy Jr., no labels, or the Libertarian Party. Any of these folks could run on an idea like Plan for America and would, you know, immediately have something of substance to say and differentiate. These candidates could all differentiate themselves from the mainstream leading party candidates who are not offering a plan at the current moment. So if you have any connections to these campaigns, we'd be happy to talk to them. Next slide, please. Oh, yes. Well, we're close to time. I don't know if anyone has any questions, but I know I threw a lot at you. I'd be happy to entertain your questions.
Okay, this is your chance to get some clarification, make some objections. A lot of you guys have finance training and so forth. You can speak language, or if you have other ideas or suggestions, comments, those would be welcome too.
What strategies does your plan propose for fostering economic growth while ensuring the well-being of the homeowner?
Okay, I think I heard him say, what does our plan do to ensure economic growth?
That's correct.
What was this? What was the latter part? Was there more to it? I heard that much of it.
Just for ensuring the well-being of all Americans. That's the last part.
The strength and well-being.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you for that question. Well, we think that our plan will strengthen the economic well-being by again creating a culture of equity over debt. We think that in order to be listed on this index, corporations will retire some of their corporate bonds in order to be on the index. And if you have $1 trillion flowing into the markets every year, that the companies are going to hire more. There's going to be more economic activity. There's going to be, greater. It's just going to create a virtuous cycle of economic well-being. And if there's certainty about it, if there's less taxation, if dividends are tax-free to corporations and tax-deductible corporations, tax-free to individuals, corporations will pay out more dividends. I mean, it's just we think that this will create a real hive of economic activity and make the United States really a magnet for capital, more so than it is today even, because companies will want to locate here to be part of this gravy train that will be the U.S. stock market.
Okay, while the students are formulating their questions, I have a question or two for you as well.
That's great.
So, first of all, this trust, how will that compare in size to the world's biggest investment groups today? I assume it will dwarf them in size, at least eventually, making them a pretty powerful player in the U.S. economy, maybe even in the U.S. political system. And, somebody who controls that much capital, is there a concern about insulating them from participating in the political process or
that's a great question, Dr. Makchak. Thank you for asking it. The question was, how will this trust? What are the mechanisms, I guess, in place to keep this trust from being too powerful or too big of a player in the world, in the field there? And we do have some safeguards built in there. For example, the trustees of the trust can only serve 1 5-year term, and they're term limited, and then they're out. All the participants in the trust would vote on the trustees, so we think these elections will be very important. But it's very also important to remember, as I think I alluded to, that the trustees have no power to determine where the investment money goes. It must go into this all-market index of U.S. publicly traded companies. So they're not picking winners or losers. They have no leeway to choose where these investments go. So their power from that standpoint is very limited. Now, the trust itself, as it grows, will be a very big player in the markets for sure. But we think it'll kind of act as a brake on severe downturns, again, because there's going to be regular buying through all the time, like the old days in the market where there were specialists, who bought to sustain things. This will be going on all the time. But the power of the trustees is clipped on purpose so that they are not all powerful people who are not held accountable.
Okay, so thank you for that. It actually leads very nicely into my next question, which is, doesn't this kind of change the function of capital markets if it is truly passive investment? Markets are supposed to provide a signal, and prices of various stocks are supposed to respond to all the information available to investors. If investors are simply passively investing and apparently if every American is going to be passively investing, will this blunt the signal that would otherwise be in the price of stocks? In other words, would it distort the price of stocks?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And, you know, I think it's one thing to keep in mind is this is not going to be all the investing in our country. I mean, there's still going to be 401k plans. There's still going to be individual investors. There's still going to be foreign investors investing in our country, in our markets. So it will not be the only, it will be in the mix, but it will not be the only player in the field. As it grows, that could be an area that would maybe warrant some you know, some thought and study on. But we think that you know, as companies, depending on their performance, some could be removed or added to the index. I mean, the index will change over time too. It won't be static. It won't be all the same companies all the time. But I mean, that's a thoughtful question, and I don't know if we can fully know the answer.
One more. The debt of the FAST fund,
Yeah,
is basically going to displace the debt that otherwise our federal government would be accumulating, right?
that's right.
So if we're worried about the effects of the government debt on the economy, should we be worried about the potential effects of the FAST debt on the economy in terms of the way it might affect interest rates?
Well, I mean, as you said, it's basically replacing. It's being, instead of being on the government books where there's no plan to pay it off and it's growing greater and greater, it's going into an arena where there is a funding mechanism. I'll use the term you probably use in some of your classes, Dr. Makchek, sinking fund. Think of this as a sinking fund, okay? There's money specifically put aside to retire this debt, and it will happen over time just based on compounding interest. So the debt will get smaller and smaller as the trust grows, as more participants grow, and so the debt, while it will be shifted from government to the trust for a while, it will be retired. It should be no bigger than what the government is, and so if anything, it will be more salutary for the markets and interest rates, in our belief.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Hey.
So this plan has a lot of things that it addresses a lot of elements involving government spending. How does this plan involve military spending in the government?
I think the question was, how does this plan involve military spending by the government?
That is correct.
Yeah, this plan does not address military spending by the government. This plan only gets retirement and health care off the government books so that they can focus on whatever else they need to do. And we think with these, with the entitlements off of the government budget, it will be much easier to have balanced budgets for the U.S. government, because the whole pie will be smaller, and you know then military and other necessary things that need to be spent on can be spent on. But we do not take a position how that money will be spent. That will be up to your elected officials, as it is today.
Could I maybe clarify your question a little bit? Are you concerned about the fact that people opt into the Plan for America, that government revenues will be insufficient to pay for the programs that we're currently rating the lockbox for? So you said the government's using current payroll taxes to fund programs.
That's right.
What happens when those payroll taxes disappear?
Okay, well, one thing to keep in mind, though, is that the benefits that are being paid out to current recipients of these entitlements are greater than the 15.3% taxes that are flowing in. So if you make that trade today, it's a win for the government, because they're spending more than they're taking in right now just on the entitlements with the 15.3, let alone anything else. So this is a good deal for government on day one.
And the difference is paid by investors in the fast bonds. Cover that.
Right, the bonds will pay off the current retirees, correct. That will be a transition period, and it will not be quick. I mean, we were so in debt, it cannot be overnight, but we think that a 30 to 50 year time frame is really fairly remarkable, given how deep a hole that we've dug for ourselves.
The question I have is, if people were forced to invest in the market, wouldn't this kind of create a moral hazard for corporations to report false or inflated earnings? Especially if you eliminate the tax code, you eliminate the incentive for corporations to report expenses and a more accurate reflection of their earnings.
Okay, if I understand your question correctly, I think you're concerned about corporations on this index maybe cooking the books or being, not reporting or disclosing what they need to disclose fairly. Is that correct?
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
Yeah, that is.
Okay, all right. Well, I alluded to that. I didn't get into great detail in my talk, just because there's so much to cover here, but that's where the proxies come into effect. Is everyone who's going to be an owner in this trust is going to have proxies to vote on all these companies, and the trustees, the 5 trustees of the trust, is going to appoint mini boards by industry. So, for example, they'll have someone over, maybe the technology sector and someone over the energy sector, and these mini boards that will dive into these company books. I mean, these companies are on indices. So these are publicly traded companies. They have mandatory disclosure, and any disclosure that is false is criminal. So I mean, they'll be on the hook for that. These mini boards are going to dive into how these corporations are run, how they're governed, how they're performing, and publish ahead of time before the annual meetings of these companies how they intend to vote as these boards. So that will be a guideline for all the people in the trust, all the citizens, to know how to vote. Is this company doing well? Is it not doing well? These mini boards will be whistleblowers if necessary, if there is any funny business going on with these companies, and they'll be promptly delisted from the index, which would be a tremendous punishment for them to be deprived of this capital every year. So it'll be in their interest to play by the rules and have honest disclosure.
Along the same lines, some people are concerned, for example, that BlackRock and other investment companies are using their proxies to push an actual political agenda. In the case of BlackRock, climate change, DEI, those kinds of things. And they can be very political in nature, at least they seem very political in nature. Do you have any safeguards to protect your proxy votes from being used in that way?
Yeah, so that's a great question too. ESG, that's another thing. I mean, now Vanguard has sworn off of that, so our preference would be them at this point, just because they've said we're not going to do that. But one of the provisions of the contract is that every individual votes his or her own proxy. You can't delegate that to the company, whichever the index fund, whatever company is administering the fund, will not have voting power. That will have to reside with the participants in the plan.
Thank you. So how do you guys feel about what you heard here tonight? Does it sound too risky, too radical? Does it sound feasible to you? Would you support some kind of, I mean, this is pretty radical reform of our welfare state. And maybe something radical at this point is necessary, but it still looks like a lot of people is risky. What do you guys think about this kind of radical reform?
I like that it has like more of a for sure thing. Like we were talking about, the locked box is a lot better than being able to take it away from you at any point. Because right now, like you were saying, there's no contract to us, it's just a promise, but not a promise that can't be broken. So even though it is more radical or seems more radical, it actually seems more secure for your own money than the current system.
Any other comments on what you heard here?
I agree with Paris. I feel like that it makes more sense from the way we understood it, where we like study economics and the financials. I just don't think it's too big of a change that a lot of Americans would be scared of it and would want to vote towards it and kind of support it. A lot to kind of understand that firsthand, and that's the big shift.
I actually was wondering how you go about, I understand you're saying the problem with Facebook and everything, and trying to make support for it. Do you have any other ideas of how to get more of the recognition towards ideas?
Dale, could you repeat that question, please? The mic was cutting out a little bit. What? Could you repeat it?
I think the idea was, in addition to your points that you made earlier about getting the word out via Facebook and introductions to various people, what else are you doing or can be done to promote this plan? Is that correct?
Yeah, great question. I mean, we started initially going to Washington and talking to congressional staffers, talking to elected officials, but in some cases it seemed like, hey, this is so big, this crosses so many committee lines, they couldn't even wrap their heads around it. So it seemed to us that we needed to try to do more of a grassroots approach. So that's why we started doing the podcast. That's why we wrote the book. That's why we're doing events such as these. And, it's just a grinded out kind of process. I do think the election year, though, does present an opportunity. So if a candidate wanting to differentiate himself or herself wanted to explore this and really, create a dynamic discussion about something that really needs to be discussed, I think that could draw a lot of interest. So I think this could be the year of opportunity. So if any of you have contacts with any of those campaigns I mentioned earlier, I think that might be the fastest way to get this into public attention.
Any way that they would start a state would adopt it?
I think the question was, is there any way a state would adopt it?
Yeah.
And the only problem with that is that, a state doesn't fund Social Security or Medicare. Those are federal programs. So, while a state might be very interested in this, it really does take the partnership, the public-private partnership of the state, the federal, and this trust together. So, unfortunately, I don't think we could do an experiment like that with one state.
I think the challenge you face is the challenge that a lot of good economic analysis faces, which is, how do you convey the level of detail that you did here tonight to ordinary people without, losing their attention? I mean, when you talk about numbers, you're a numbers guy, obviously, but a politician has to, speak to the heart and make this message compelling. So I don't know how you do that with your plan. I think maybe your anecdotes at the beginning. You probably have a lot of human interest stories. I love what I heard about your brother Terry, his concern for his grandchildren. I'm dealing with the same thing right now with my children, and how they feel about the American dream. And I share Terry's concern and their concern that the American dream for this particular generation has been put a little further out of reach by our policies. And that is fundamentally unjust. It could be that maybe producing this as a message of justice as opposed to efficiency might resonate with some people.
I think that's a great point. It is. I think the American dream has been put further out of reach by the policies of our government where we are today, and yeah, it isn't fair. I agree.
Question from online says, how close is this plan to some of the alternative programs suggested at the onset of the Depression? Were any of the more conservative visions for the solutions to economic challenges in the 1930s like this plan?
The programs posed in the 1930s, as I understand it, part of the New Deal, that did include Social Security. Are you talking about some of the ones that were not enacted, or are you talking about Social Security itself?
The question didn't specify, but I would guess.
Okay.
So.
I'm not as familiar with any plans that were not enacted in the 30s. I mean, Social Security was set up. Let's talk about Social Security though. When it was set up, back then, the average life expectancy of a U.S. citizen was about 67 years old. So, and Social Security kicked in when you were 65. So it was meant to be a little stopgap, a little temporary funding to help you in the twilight of your life. It was never meant to be the primary source of your income in retirement, which unfortunately for too many people it is today. Also back then we had about 40 workers, somewhere between 30 and 40 workers for every retiree. Today we have maybe 2 or 3 workers for every retiree. So things have shifted dramatically. People are living a lot longer than they were in the 30s. We have far fewer workers supporting the system. Demographics went all the other way. I guess the big difference in the 30s was, even though we were in an economic crisis, the Great Depression, we had nowhere near the debt we have today. We probably virtually had no debt as a government. So we were in a much stronger position. In fact, we went into great deficit spending during World War II, and that's the only thing that got us out of the Depression was World War II. None of the New Deal projects really turned the economy around. It took a world war. So hopefully we don't have to go down that path again to revitalize everything.
All right. Well, that was a fascinating presentation. I think your political challenges are real. I thank you for your activism, and I wish you well. And I now invite our audience to show your appreciation for Mr. Nagar.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed being there virtually with you.
So that concludes our lecture for tonight. Thank you for joining us here or online. And again, I just want to remind you that we'll be back here at 7 o'clock 2 weeks from tonight for a film screening of The Hong Konger. So see you there. Bye. You guys.